With me this afternoon is Peter Carlson. He's an associate professor of religion at California Lutheran University. They regularly teach courses in gender and queer theology, and they direct a women's and gender studies minor there at California Lutheran University. Peter's a scholar of religious history and gender. Their work has focused on constructions of masculinity and femininity in the late medieval and early modern periods, as well as theologies of sexuality and gender construction across religious traditions. Peter graduated from Claremont Graduate School and Wheaton College. He was a fellow at Lincoln College, Oxford. Peter is a committed Episcopalian for whatever that's worth. He has presented to religious groups on the history of the Christian Church, the pursuit and quality of sacred space, medieval history, and the history of gender and marriage. And Carlson lives in Thousand Oaks, California, where it is now 9:27 in the morning. So thank you for getting up early, Peter, to be with us here at St. Stephen's in the Incarnation.
It's my very great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. So the way this is going to work is that Peter and I are going to talk for a few minutes about his work, and then we're going to throw the floor open to questions. And so we'll just go ahead and we'll see how this works. This is the first time we've done a forum like this. And if it works, we'll be doing other forums like this where we'll bring in scholars and specialists who can provoke us and teach us and encourage us. So the first question that I wanted to ask you, Dr. Carlson, is what prompted you to write something called a Queer Lectionary? Why did you do this?
Wow, great question. In year A, the preface started with the sentence, "This all began as an online encounter, but then again, so did my marriage." This actually started as something that I was doing online on social media. And it was because I was hearing sermons. As you can imagine, I've always belonged to churches. I wanted to be in a church where I was encouraged to belong as a queer person, but even in those progressive churches, I wasn't often hearing sermons delivered from a particularly queer perspective. And so I was not, it's like in the, seeing the romances as a young gay boy, right? I never saw a romance film that told my story, right? And I wasn't hearing my story in the sermons. And so I started really just writing these random sermons from my own perspective and post them online. The idea for a sermon collection following the lectionary actually came from my work as a medievalist, because in the medieval period, books of sermons were sent out to all the so that they could make sure, that Rome could make sure that all of the sermons were preaching good Orthodox theology. And so I've long dealt with sermon collections from the medieval period, and it struck me as a possibility to create a new kind of sermon collection for the modern day from a queer perspective. And so that was sort of the impulse for the whole thing.
Okay. In your introduction to a Queer Lectionary, you write that, quote, churches should serve as queer, liminal, othered spaces in which the world's values no longer hold sway and where we can encounter a queer divine. What do you mean by that?
My goodness. So much to unpack in that line. Thank you for that. it's one of the things that the subtitle of the book is improper readings from margins, right? And basically the first of all, it's a play on propers, right? The readings that are proper to each Sunday, right? And the more important aspect is that it's from the margins, right? I am convinced that the gospel is primarily good news for people in the margins, right? And that therefore churches need to be marginal as well, right? As soon as churches begin to center themselves in power, in politics, in economics, right, then I think they've lost aesthetic voice. So the church needs to be a place where people can step away from the center of power and enter into the margins. I believe God is in the margins, and I believe that God is profoundly improper. I am deeply influenced by the queer theologian Marcia Aldaspri, of blessed memory. We lost her far too soon, who wrote of what she called indecent theology. And the challenge to the church is that we have made God's work decent. And if there's anything indecent about our beliefs as Christians, it's that God, first of all, took on a body. Incarnation, right? This is the central doctrine of our church. The one thing you have to believe to be a Christian is that God took on a body. God was fascinated by bodies and wanted to have one, right? And that very same body was crucified indecently because of the work that they were doing. And we pretty that up. We've had 1,000 years of trying to make that decent. And Marcel Reed argues that that's a problem. The church needs to be indecent. It needs to be a place where we are telling the world, no, the center's power are all wrong, right? Seeking after being at the center is not what we should be doing. There's a challenge to that. The challenge is that the world doesn't like us when we do that, right? And that's the basic challenge of Christianity. If indeed we follow Jesus, we will end up like Jesus, which is dead. But the great hope of Christianity is that we believe that death doesn't bat last, and that there are worse things than dying.
Yeah, you had an interesting take on the Nicene Creed, and where you talk about how the Nicene Creed presents to us the idea of embodiment. And I want you to elaborate on that and just sort of how what goes through your mind and your heart every week when you recite the creed.
We make some audacious claims in that creed, don't we? Big wild ass. I'm sorry. Apologies, everybody. I have a T-shirt that says "I love Jesus, but I cuss a little." But we do. We make some really far-fetched claims in that creed. So I freely admit that there are times when I keep my fingers crossed. And because sometimes the audacity of what we believe is something that I can't claim on my own. I need the community, right? This is another thing that church does, is it provides this community of people who are either outsiders or have stepped to the outsides, right? Mm-hmm. To be in community together, and together we can make these incredible claims, right? I mean, we think about this idea of God as a creator, right? We make a claim, we stake a claim that the universe is divinely created, right? We stake a claim that the universe is not only divinely created, but that the divine cares about it. And cares about it so much that in the second part of the creed, we stake our faith on the fact that God cared about it so much that God wanted to become part of it. Right? And willingly incarnated, right? Incarnation, literally enfleshment, took on flesh, right? We forget that that's what incarnation means. And I'm sure you don't at St. Stephen in the Incarnation, right? I mean, it's literally enfleshment, it's embodiment, right? And that this body, right? God in a body, right? Thinking that bodies are so cool that they want to experience it with us, right? And that tells me that our bodies are themselves holy and that our bodies are intact. And then we also believe in this last thing called Ms. Holy Spirit, right? Who comes in and inspires, literally brings us breath, right?
Mm-hmm.
And takes us to places we never dreamed we would go. You know, so, I mean, this creed that we say every Sunday is mind-boggling in its audacity. And it is really scary if we open ourselves up to it. Because I don't know about the people there, but if there's anyone there where Moose Holy Spirit thing has come in and like utterly changed your life in ways that you weren't thinking was going to
Mm-hmm.
right? You know how unnerving and unsettling that can be, right? So the creed is this remarkably unsettling thing. So that's why I keep my fingers crossed, as I say.
So that's why you keep your fingers crossed. But so getting back to sort of queering, you have this concept of queering the church, queering the gospel, queering God's message.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Through that lens, what is then the basis of what we believe and the foundations of our faith?
Just sum it up in a word: multiplicity. Queerness and queering. I love the word queer because it can be a noun, it can be an adjective, it can be a verb, right? It's a very queer word. The queering really takes unto itself a distrust of binaries, that something is either this or that, right? That there are only two options. And that's really hard for us to grasp because we are raised where binaries, right? One of my favorite books that I read to my nieces and nephews was the Sesame Street Book of Opposites, right? And so we in binary, big, little, start, end, right? All of these things we learn. And so what that means is that we learn that there is a thing, right? And then we learn that there's a thing that is not the thing. Mm-hmm. And queering says, well, okay, so there's the thing, right? And then there's the thing that is not the thing, right? So we have in gender, right? We have the male, and then we have the thing that is not the male, which is the female, which in a patriarchal society, literally the female helps to define the male. Welcome to patriarchy. The female's job is to define the male. In other words, I must be male. I don't act like a woman, right? But queering says, okay, you have the thing and you have the thing that is not the thing, but what do you do with the thing that is not the thing that is not the thing? There's more than two, right? So what it does is it suggests multiplicity, right? This is ultimately important in our faith, right? We believe in this, speaking of insane things we believe, right? We believe in the Trinity. That God is three persons in one God. I defy anybody to explain the Trinity logically in a way that has not been condemned as heresy by the church. It's not possible, right? Even our belief in God is about a God of multiplicity. And within that multiplicity, a God of relationship.
Yeah, in fact, it's a God from whom male and female emerged.
And other, I would say. you know, that the challenge is that we tend to think that God only created male and female. And queerness, then, queering the church, says, let's push back against that, because what do we do with those of us that don't fit either the thing or the thing that is not the thing? Does that make sense?
Well, let me throw it out to the folk who are gathered here. If you have any questions or comments you want to make.
I love this idea of the non-dual, that it seems to me to be absolutely before. That the tree of knowledge of good and evil is that dualistic thinking was introduced with that point. And that led to a lot of our suffering. And Jesus being on the new tree is our moving beyond that, or before that. Time is not linear.
Yeah. Did you hear any of that?
I heard a little bit. If you could recap that for me, that would be great.
Well, if and correct me if I don't get it right, but the point was that she said she loved the idea of being beyond the duality, and that actually the tree of the knowledge of good and evil sort of actually introduced this duality and this conflict within duality to the world, and Jesus is trying to move us beyond that. The point of Jesus and Jesus's ministry is to move us beyond that, to move us above that, if I have that right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Pretty close. Okay.
This is such great thinking. I'm loving where the person is going. First of all, I love that you brought up the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because that lends so many problems if we want to take the whole story too literally. Like, first of all, God, you're supposed to be smart. Why did you even put the tree in the garden? Like, really? Come on. It's like telling a 3-year-old, don't touch the oven. We're going to do it. Don't even let us into the kitchen. Okay. But that's another binary, isn't it? That binary of good and evil. And yet all of us know that good and evil is not that simple, right? Like how my students is that, I have an attendance policy that I have because I don't want them pretending to be sick. I said, lying is stupid about stupid things. Save your lives for the important stuff.
Okay.
No, there are no Jews in my attic. There are important lies we will need to tell. Right? Mm-hmm. Good and evil are not that simple. We all know that, right? We all know, right? In fact, our most generous and our best impulses are usually the most complex. My simplest impulses are toward evil, when I just lash out at people and I'm angry. But when I'm trying to do the right thing, that's when it becomes a really difficult decision, right? Life does not offer us a choice between a tragedy and a comedy,
yeah.
Right? Life offers us very often 2 tragedies or more, and we have to figure out which is the least tragic, right? Mm-hmm. You need to remember that comedy in the famous line is just tragedy that's had some time to sit around for a while.
Oh, that's true. Go ahead.
So yeah, I love that. I love bringing up good and evil. Thank you.
Right.
Well, I think it's actually more just a duality, that I think that tree is more about duality than it is about
the tree is more about duality than it is about good and evil, she said.
I think it is. And I think, yeah, and I think that, and I think that's really important. I think that one of the things that we forget is that second creation story, right, the Adam and Eve story, is the first creation story in Genesis 1, which is an entirely different text, right? That second story is basically looking at the universe going, this is beautiful. But all it takes is a moment to look around to see that things have really gone off the rail. How do we explain that? Right? Mm-hmm. and there is a tendency throughout the Bible to read things in dualities, right? And in a way, I love what you're saying, and I may be taking this in a new direction, so apologies if I'm doing that. But it strikes me that you're thinking of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as the danger of dualistic thinking, of binaries. Is that going with that? Because that's really interesting to me.
She said yes. You had a comment.
Yeah. How is it that our Lord created many animals, but the only duality, not singularity, is correct among humans? Or maybe some penguins, because there is a shortage of women.
Did you hear all of that?
I had a hard time hearing that. Apologies.
Okay. I'm going to experiment here. This is dangerous.
I
I'm going
live for danger.
That's good.
Okay. I think I'm going to try this. Okay, can you repeat your question?
How is it that our Lord, who created many animals, have only one who is dual, not singular, and except the penguins, because there are less women? Environmental.
Thank you for that. I'm actually reminded by.
Let him speak.
Okay, well, go ahead, Peter.
So if I understand, why is there like this binary of male and female among the animal kingdom? Is that asking?
Among the animals that God has created, there is only one who are dual.
But we're not.
Well, I think that actually one of the intriguing things that biologists are teaching us, and I have a dear friend here at California Lutheran University in the biology department who teaches the biology of sex and gender, and she's always excited about her students going when their brains just sort of explode at the complexities of biology throughout the animal kingdom, right? So, I mean, we have from the single-cell organisms that don't even procreate by sex, but procreate by division, right? We see also multiplicities of sort of gender experience in the entire animal kingdom, right? In humans, we have intersex. Intersex also occurs in other animals as well, right? What we might call, since, thank you, Dr. Freud, in the 19th century, homosexual behavior is actually quite common throughout the animal kingdom, right? We see that quite regularly, right?
That's only in the penguins.
Oh no, it's in many more than penguins, right? Intersex behavior.
I've not heard that anywhere else.
Well,
yeah.
Well, I'm not a PhD in psychology or in etiology, but think it that way.
So I think it is more than penguins. We see same-sex behavior, courtship, mounting, pair bonding, and raising young together. There's a famous gay couple of flamingos who have who hatched a chick together because the egg was abandoned by the mother, right? So I think actually we see this. It's a lot more common than we often think, right? And so that's something I think that's very, very important to remember, is that in this entire created universe, there are multiplicities of gendered expressions across the entire animal kingdom. Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go back to your conversation about the creed and the idea of the theology of the body. And I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the line about the resurrection of the body from that understanding.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I am not an anthological theologian. In other words, I don't necessarily think about the end times, in part because I was raised in a quite conservative evangelical background where the end times were something that everybody obsessed over and used to keep us afraid. Resurrection of the body, I will freely admit I have no idea what specifically that should look like. But what I know is that in proclaiming that we believe in the resurrection of the body, we are declaring the holiness of our bodies. I absolutely am convinced that this is not some Neoplatonic understanding of the transmigration of the soul, where our soul will continue eternally and finally escape from materiality entirely, right? Because material is bad. This is a proclamation that the material is good. Right? And I joke about the resurrection of the body, right? Because I don't know what it means. And I'm like, do I get to pick the body? Right? Can I have my 28-year-old body, which actually also had a 28-inch waist, right? With my 65-year-old brain and experience, can I do that, God? Would that be okay with you? Right? I don't know. But what I know is that it's a proclamation, right? That bodies matter, right? And this is especially important in a religious tradition that has spent 2,000 years trying to tell us that bodies are icky. Right? And so he didn't help us there. He bless his heart, he was trying to explain a very fleshy, odd little Jewish, dare I say, queer little Jewish sect to a bunch of people who were steeped in Platonic mind-body dualism. They were steeped in that sort of Greek understanding of the material as bad, right? And so he had to do a translation of that sect into something they could understand, right? And that has stuck with us. St. Augustine didn't help. St. Augustine of Hippo explaining that going off on original sin and explaining that original sin, we are born with the stain of original sin because our parents did the nasty. He literally said that original sin is transmitted through semen. I'm not making that up, by the way. That's St. Augustine, right? He did not help with our thinking of bodies as icky, right? So we need to reclaim our bodies, and I think that paying attention to the creed is a really good starting point. So I realized I didn't tell you what I think about the resurrection of the body. I don't know what body I'll get. I hope it's a good one.
Yeah. Do you think there was some psychologist among the flamingos and the penguins, just like the one who talked about the mothers? And that is very common among the domineering mothers in the Jewish state you're talking about, because there are quite a few Jewish homosexuals around. Is there any relationship?
I don't know if there's a relationship. I know there are quite a few Jewish homosexuals around. I'm married to one of them. And he keeps me honest in my Christianity. In fact, I mentioned we met online and we were enchanted with each other online because the queer bashers who would come into our online forum would start quoting the Hebrew Bible, and he would say, well, actually, in the Hebrew, this is what that says. And then when they would switch to the Christian scriptures, I would say, well, actually, in Koine Greek, we don't even know what that word means. And so that was actually what drew us to each other. So I don't know particularly what connection that might have with Judaism, but I know plenty of queer folk in every faith, and I have many, many friends who are queer Muslims, who are queer Buddhists, who are queer Hindus, who are queer Jews, who are Christians, who are atheists.
See, I speak as a 8-year-old, okay? My birthday is on September 14th. Okay. There is Sigmund Freud. I think you've heard of him because you're a PhD. So how is it that he found out something which is very, very, very clear? That is, the mother domineering and loving is the one that creates this thing called transgender or not normal, but queer.
Well, okay, go ahead.
First of all, Freud, I think, was wrong. And the field of psychiatry and psychology today have essentially the theory of the domineering mother creating the homosexual, right? And so I think that Freud was wrong. Ironically, what Freud did in identifying something called homosexual, right, was he created an identity for people who did not have an identity. Before that, it was simply men who had sex with men. It was an activity, not an identity. So, ironically, Freud was the one who gave us our identity.
Go ahead,
I have a somewhat different direction. Sorry, 2 points. One, just a footnote, because I'm also obsessed with the Nicene Creed, and I think at the end it basically says, we await the resurrection from death. It's an adjective, so and it could be read quite literally as we await the awakening from death. We await being aroused from death. So it doesn't necessarily have to involve the body one way or the other, or a spirit either. But anyway, that's just a footnote. My question generally is that your the Queer Lectionary. It's a great title, but it's misleading. It's actually a set of sermons, right? It's not a lectionary, and there which is fine. But I wanted to ask, what's your advice in terms of what translations and so forth one should use? What is the best? What's available that should be used for the actual lectionary and the readings from week to week?
Great question, and yes, it is a bit misleading. One of the reasons it's structured as this literally does follow the Revised Common Lectionary that a number of different Christian denominations use. And the reason for that is because a constant claim about my theology is that it's unbiblical. One of my favorite social media moments was when someone posted, in all caps, of course, "You really need to read the Bible." And I can't tell you the joy that it gave me to be able to respond. I literally read the Bible for my job, like literally part of my job. But translations. My answer is yes. We tend to use the New Revised Standard Version updated. in the Episcopal Church, but I am a big fan at looking at a number of different translations, especially if you don't, as most of us don't, right? If you don't have facility in the original languages, right? Using different translations can be really important. Again, we're talking multiplicities, aren't we? Right? And the reason for that is because different translations have different qualities. Any of us who have done translation work from any language into another language, we know how hard the work is. You go for a literal meaning or try to get at the intended meaning, right? Idiom is so hard to translate. We say in the United States, it's raining cats and dogs. That makes no sense to people in other countries. In Holland, they say it's pissing buckets, which sounds disgusting to us. So how do you translate, right? So I encourage people to use multiple translations. BibleGateway.com is one of my favorite ever websites, because it gives you access to multiple translations in multiple languages. If English is not your first language, I promise they have the Bible in your language. Looking at how different time periods have translated the text is so important, right? So, especially for those who have the privilege, and it's a daunting privilege, right, of sermonizing on our lectionary. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to use multiple translations.
On that point, I don't remember all of the details of this, but there was a documentary that came out about a year or so ago that said that talked about the year 1946 and the meeting that took place in 1946, which basically introduced the explicit word homosexuality into Bible translations.
Wow.
Can you talk a little?
The word, first of all, isn't in the Bible, right? That's because the word homosexual was invented in the 19th century. It's like, remember what I said about Freud giving us an identity?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
The word homosexual didn't exist until the 19th century. The concept didn't exist. Before that, it was men who had sex with men, right? And so, yes, 1946 was the year that they added the word homosexual. And it had to do with arsenokoites in the Greek word that's used twice, I think, in the Christian scriptures. And the problem with that word, is we don't know what it means, right? And so, again, here's where this is the other thing to do when doing with scripture. Always try to find out as much as you can about context. What was going on in Corinth in the first century? Oh, look up the hill at the temple of Apollo, right? Who were the Corinthians worshiping who were not Christians, right? These kinds of things, right? Temple sex, temple prostitution, we might call it today, right? But the idea that there were devotees of a god or a goddess, right, whose was to provide sexual encounters as a way of encountering the divine, right? Paul was trying to tell the Corinthians, you need to be different. You need to step away from the centers of power, right? And not be like these people, right? Be Christian, be different, be unique, right? Pay attention to what Jesus said, right? Not to what the temple prostitutes were saying. The reality is we'll never know exactly what that word means, but if we take the context, one thing we can be sure of is that it doesn't mean homosexual.
Well, Dr. Carlson, I really want to extend this conversation, but unfortunately we have to go. So I wanted to thank you for the time you've spent with us, and we really appreciate it. By the way, we've been passing your book around, a copy of your book around, so that people can have a look.
Thank you very much. It's the availability date. Its release is July 7th. Year B. Year A is out. It's available. And I'm definitely encouraging people not to Amazon, because I think Jeff Bezos has enough money. I don't think he needs any more money.
Yeah, but take the case of Elon Musk.
Yeah, right.
He has got a son who is trans.
I agree. So I want to encourage people to use indiepubs.com or indiepubs.org, ordering the book, or you can go directly to churchpublishing.org and order it through them. It's available on Amazon too, but
Yeah. And I also wanted to
spend time with you all.
I also wanted to pass on that our rector couldn't be here, but he was disappointed when he first found that this would be this would be online instead of in person, because he wanted you to autograph his copy. So, he said that he wanted to be here, but couldn't
time on my returning. Let's plan on a time when I can be there in person and worship with you all. Whatever the music was beforehand, that music was glorious. Thank you that you were playing beforehand.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
all.
All right.
Take care of yourself.
All right.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.
Bye now.